You forgot the number. Not because it's gone, because you never really held it. You saw it, tapped it, the call went through. Your brain registered the outcome, not the digits. That's the part nobody talks about, the moment of not storing. It doesn't feel like forgetting. It feels like everything working exactly as it should. And that's precisely why you won't notice it happening. Not today. Probably not tomorrow either. Just a quiet, invisible transaction your mind agreed to without asking you first. And it does work. That's the uncomfortable part. You got the call made, you got the address, you got the name of that restaurant from 3 years ago retrieved in 4 seconds flat. The system is efficient, frictionless, almost elegant. Your hands know where to go before your mind finishes forming the question, so nothing feels broken. Nothing registers as loss. It just feels like a normal day, like every other normal day before it. Except something is slowly not being practiced anymore. Something small, something you can't quite name yet. There's a structure deep inside your brain called the hippocampus. It's old, evolutionarily old, and its entire job is consolidation. Taking something fragile and temporary and pressing it into something that lasts. But it only does that work when it's asked to. When you struggle to remember a route, when you repeat a number in your head, when you try to recall a face without help, that's the hippocampus working. That's the demand that keeps it sharp. And when the demand disappears, the muscle doesn't scream. It just quietly stops being used as much. No warning, no signal, nothing that feels like anything at all. Researchers call it cognitive offloading. The brain, when it knows information is stored somewhere external and reliably accessible, reduces the energy it spends encoding that information internally. It's not laziness, it's efficiency. The brain is always trying to conserve resources, always running some background calculation about what's worth keeping and what isn't. And right now, in 2025, almost everything has an external backup. So the brain's answer to "should I store this?" is increasingly quietly no. Not dramatically, just no. A small decision made 1,000 times a day without you ever being consulted. The strange thing is that you felt it. You just didn't know what you were feeling. That moment when someone asks for your best friend's number and your mind goes completely blank, not foggy blank. Not foggy blank. Or when you've driven a route 100 times and suddenly realize you couldn't describe a single turn from memory. It feels like a glitch. Like something slipping. Most people quietly file it under getting older and move on. But age isn't really the variable here. Demand is. And demand has been dropping steadily for about 15 years now. So gradually that nobody thought to mark the starting point. Here's what actually happens when you store something in long-term memory. The hippocampus doesn't just copy and paste. It reconstructs repeatedly, strengthening neural connections each time a memory is retrieved, each time it's used. That process of retrieval, of effortful recall, is what makes memory durable. It's not the storing that matters most. It's the reaching back in. And when you stop reaching back in when the phone answers before the question fully forms, that retrieval pathway gets less traffic. Less traffic means weaker connections. Weaker connections means the memory was never really built the way it needed to be. You had the information. You just never really owned it. And then there's dopamine, which makes this whole thing considerably messier. Every time you find the answer instantly, tap, search, there it is, there's a small reward signal. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just enough. A little flicker of satisfaction that the system worked, that the friction was avoided, that you didn't have to sit with not knowing for more than a few seconds. That flicker is real. It's neurochemical. And over time, the brain starts to associate that instant retrieval with something pleasant, and the slow, effortful process of actually remembering with something unnecessary. Why struggle when the answer is already there? The brain isn't asking that rhetorically. It's genuinely optimizing around your behavior. What nobody tells you is that the discomfort of not knowing, that brief, slightly anxious pause before a memory surfaces, is actually part of the process. That tension is the hippocampus working. That mild frustration is consolidation happening in real time. When you cut it short, when you reach for the phone, the moment uncertainty appears, you're not just finding the answer faster. You're interrupting something. A process that needed a few more seconds to do what it was designed to do. The answer arrives. The process doesn't finish. And you walk away feeling fine, which is exactly the problem. Think about directions for a second. Not GPS directions, actual spatial memory. The kind where you build a mental map of a place over time, where you start to feel a city rather than just follow it. That process involves the hippocampus heavily, and researchers have studied it enough to know that consistent GPS reliance measurably reduces hippocampal engagement during navigation. The brain stops constructing the map because the map is already being provided. Why build something you're being handed? It makes perfect sense as a short-term calculation. As a long-term one, it means you can live somewhere for 3 years and still feel like a stranger in it, present, but not really oriented, moving through space without ever quite inhabiting it. And this isn't just about directions or phone numbers. It bleeds into other things in ways that are harder to trace. Conversations where you can't quite remember what someone told you last week, not because you weren't listening, but because some part of your brain already knew you could ask again. Meetings where the details dissolve almost immediately because notes were being taken and therefore the encoding felt optional. Experiences that feel strangely thin afterward, like you were there but didn't fully land. The memory of the photo exists. The memory of the moment is somewhere underneath it, fainter, less constructed than it should be. You documented it. You just didn't quite live it into your long-term memory the way your brain used to do automatically. There's a term, the Google effect, that came out of research around 2011 when people were just starting to notice something odd about how memory was behaving around search engines. What the researchers found wasn't that people were becoming less intelligent. It was more specific than that. People were becoming worse at remembering information they believed was saved somewhere, and better at remembering where to find it. The brain was reorganizing around the architecture of external storage, not breaking down, adapting, shifting its priorities in response to the environment it was actually living in, which sounds almost reasonable until you sit with what it means. The content is becoming secondary. The location of the content is what gets encoded now. You don't remember the fact, you remember that Google has it, and the systems around you are designed with full awareness of this dynamic, even if nobody says it plainly. An app that makes you slightly dependent on it for recall is an app you open more often. A platform that becomes your external memory is a platform you cannot comfortably leave. It's not a conspiracy. It's just incentive structure following its own logic. The more your brain outsources to a specific tool, the more friction there is in abandoning that tool. The more returning to it feels not like a choice, but like a need. Dependency doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. Sometimes it just looks like opening the same app 17 times a day and never quite asking yourself why. The part that sits uncomfortably is how it feels from the inside, because it doesn't feel like erosion. It feels like clarity. It feels like having a cleaner mind, less cluttered, more focused on what matters. And in a narrow sense, that's even true. You're not wasting mental energy on things the phone handles better. But there's a cost buried inside that efficiency that only becomes visible much later, in moments that don't announce themselves as significant. The conversation where you realize you can't remember a single specific thing your father said to you last Christmas, only that it was fine, only that it happened. The trip you took that exists now almost entirely as a folder of images. The years that compress strangely because nothing was ever really encoded with enough friction to make it feel distinct from everything else. Memory isn't just storage, that's the thing. It's how time gets texture. It's how a year feels like a year instead of a blur with a few photographs in it. The hippocampus doesn't just file things away. It builds the scaffolding of a life that feels lived, felt, accumulated. And when that process runs at reduced capacity for long enough, the past starts to feel thin. Not gone, just thin. Like trying to read something through slightly frosted glass. You know there's something there. You can make out the shape of it. But the detail, the specific, irreplaceable detail that makes a memory feel like yours, that part is just slightly out of reach. And you're not always sure when it started feeling that way. What makes this particularly hard to sit with is that there's no moment of rupture, no single decision that started it. Just 1,000 small frictions quietly removed, 1,000 small efforts quietly avoided, across years that felt perfectly normal while they were happening. You didn't choose to stop memorizing. You just stopped needing to. And the brain, always economical, always adjusting, simply followed. It's not damage in any clinical sense. It's adaptation. But adaptation to what exactly? That's the question worth holding. The environment your brain is adapting to was not designed with your cognitive depth in mind. It was designed to be returned to, repeatedly, without too much thinking in between. And somewhere underneath all of this is a feeling that a lot of people carry, but rarely name precisely. A vague sense that the mind is somehow less than it used to be. Not broken, not diagnosable, just quieter in ways that feel wrong, less sharp at the edges. People attribute it to stress, to age, to sleep, to everything except the actual pattern of cognitive demand they've been living inside for the past decade. Because that explanation isn't satisfying. It doesn't have a villain. It doesn't have a clear before and after. It's just a slow, structurally invisible shift in what the brain is being asked to do and what it's quietly stopped doing on its own. The hippocampus doesn't send distress signals. That's worth saying plainly. There's no internal alarm that fires when consolidation drops below some threshold. No sensation that maps cleanly onto my memory as being undertrained. What you get instead are these small, ambient moments of blankness that feel like ordinary forgetting. The name that won't come, the conversation that dissolved, the face you recognize but can't place, each one unremarkable on its own. Each one easy to dismiss, but they're not random. They're the predictable output of a system that has been quietly relieved of a job it used to perform constantly, automatically, without anyone asking it to stop. And that's where this transmission ends, not with a solution, because there isn't a clean one, and not with reassurance, because that's not what this is. Just with the observation that your brain is not failing you. It's doing exactly what brains do, responding to the demands being placed on it, or more precisely, to the demands that have stopped being placed on it. The phone isn't making you forgetful. It's just making certain kinds of remembering unnecessary. And the brain, ancient and efficient and completely indifferent to what you think you want, is simply taking the hint. It has been for years. You're only just noticing now. Or maybe you noticed a while ago and looked it up, found the answer in seconds, and then moved on without quite letting it land.